back to NeuroDiverse Christian Couples. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Dan.
And we are excited to have back, at your request, listeners, Dr. Karl Lehman. Thank you for joining us again on the show.
Hey, you're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Well, and just in case if you're tuning in for the first time and you're wondering, well, who is Dr. Karl Lehman? He's a board certified psychiatrist with 35 years plus and 40,000 hours of clinical experience. He's worked tenaciously throughout his career to integrate his personal Christian faith with medical science, modern mental health care, and his rigorous scientific training. He has researched and worked especially to integrate faith based emotional healing with insights provided by psychological and neurological research. Dr. Lehman is also deeply committed to his own growth and healing. He's been married for over 30 years to Charlotte, and he and Charlotte work as a team to apply everything they learn about growth and healing in the context of their marriage. I found Dr. Karl through Dr. Wilder's work, author of Outsmarting Yourself and the Immanuel Approach. So, with that, assuming some of our listeners did not listen to our previous podcast with you, it seems like in starting our discussion today, we might need a refresher on the verbal logical explainer and how we make meaning of our memories and how trauma gets integrated with how we apply that story. So, will you just start us off going head first and a reminder of what the VLE is?
Yes, I'll see if I can give you this 7-minute summary of about 150 pages from Outsmarting Yourself.
Right.
So yes, so what I want to try to do is like triggering trauma, implicit memory, and the VLE. They kind of all fit together. And so the pieces that are relevant for the real world for every couple, every person, but we're especially talking about couples here, is uh, when you have traumatic memories, that means there's unmetabolized pain. There's toxic content in those memories that was not fully metabolized. And when something triggers or activates that memory, that content kind of comes forward into the present. So everybody kind of gets that. I mean, Hollywood knows about that. And there's movies and stories and books. The idea of, oh, you can tell that person has gotten triggered. This Vietnam veteran, something has caused him to have a flashback from the jungles of Vietnam. This woman is remembering being sexually abused as a girl. The idea of old traumatic memories can kind of get stirred up and come forward into the present. People generally get that. There's two pieces that are especially important. One is that content almost always comes forward as implicit memory, which tends to be invisible to your conscious mind. Explicit memory is, oh, I remember what I had for breakfast this morning. And if you ask me, Dr. Karl, what did you have for breakfast? I feel like, oh, I'm remembering. Let's see, I can pause for a moment and kind of scroll back in my video of my life. And it feels like I'm recalling a part of my story from this morning. I can kind of remember being at the table, what I have for breakfast, and I'll tell you about it. And that feels like I'm remembering part of my own personal timeline. And that's what everybody thinks of as remembering. Well, implicit memory, the content from that old trauma slides forward and it just feels true in the present. The thoughts and emotions from that traumatic memory, they just feel true as if they are valid right now. And then where the verbological explainer comes in is that's a part of your brain that it kind of weaves the narrative of your life as you just go through each day. And most of the time, that's a really good function. It makes sense out of your life. Oh, it tells you what you're doing right now. I'm driving down the street on the way to the grocery store. Oh, my uncle just is coming to visit. Just the normal fabric of life. That part of your brain is kind of looking around at what's in your environment and kind of generating a narrative of what's happening right now. What does it mean? I'm on a podcast with this couple who specializes in neurodivergent marriages, and we're talking about the verbological explainer. That's all good. The reason that's particularly relevant for our conversation today is if you have an old traumatic memory activated, and the content that from that memory comes forward as implicit memory, so those thoughts and feelings feel true right now. The way the verbological explainer is built, apparently there has not been a circuit in there that signals your verbological explainer. This is implicit memory content from when you were 15 years old. This is not about your wife right now. Unfortunately, that circuit was not included. As I mentioned last time, that's a conversation I'm going to have with Jesus when I get to heaven. Lord, That would have been so nice if you had given us a little warning buzzer that says beep 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 beep. This is not about Dan. This is about what my father did when he went to when he got a business call on my birthday, and I'm all upset that he wasn't there for me emotionally. This is not about Dan. This is not about today. This is not. You know, if that happened, old memory, triggered traumatic memories would cause much less trouble if we had that circuit. As far as anybody can tell, we don't. So what that means is when an old painful memory gets triggered, your husband or your wife does something that reminds you of whatever happened when you were 3 or 5 or 10 or 12. That old content comes forward. It feels true in the present. And your verbological explainer is aware of the thoughts and feelings and makes up a story that includes basically a story about how the person in front of you is actually causing those thoughts and feelings right now. And what feels true is I want my husband or wife, I want them to own they are responsible for these painful thoughts and emotions I'm feeling. They should take full responsibility for what feels true right now. They should apologize for it, and they should fix it and make restitution. They should take responsibility, apologize, and make restitution for what feels true right now in the present. And where that causes so much trouble is your spouse correctly perceives, hey, I did something right now. I made a mistake. I didn't attune. I was inconsiderate. I was late. Whatever the deal was, I recognize that I did something today that is causing some pain, and I'll own that and apologize for that. But they don't want to take responsibility for the half the pain, the three quarters of the pain that's coming from when you were in sixth grade and your father missed your dance recital or whatever. Your husband does not want to take responsibility and apologize and get billed emotionally for the content that's coming from your memory. What your verbological explainer is going to tell you is going to build a narrative that explains why it actually is his fault. He's causing it. It's that shirt, his glasses, he's something about his expression, and you can't quite pin it down because it actually is not true. But it's bizarre how true it feels when your verbological explainer gives you that narrative. It's hard to get words to adequately express how true it feels that the person standing in front of you is actually responsible for that old implicit memory content. So, was that did I leave anything out I should fill in?
Uh, Maybe an adjunct thing, going to the apology thing. So let's say it actually is your fault. Like 20 years ago, I did whatever it was, and that in this conversation, that is resurfacing as implicit. A apology in the moment where that is only implicit in the listener's mind doesn't actually resolve that issue, and I'm asking this as a question. Therefore, the next time we have a conversation, that same implicit memory shows back up, and I have to apologize every time that implicit thing shows up because the connection between I'm sorry I did X, but
Yes.
because it wasn't expressed openly, it doesn't adequately ever get, as your word used, metabolized. It doesn't ever get resolved.
That's a very good question, Dan. So let me touch it three ways. First of all, um, it's it's almost it's almost always the case that there's some from your childhood. And if you've been married for 30 years and you are responsible for a number of the previous, today I forgot your anniversary. And unfortunately, because of my woundedness and dysfunction, whatever, I've done that a number of times in the past. So some of the pain is today. I forgot your anniversary today. Some of the pain is, and I did that 10 years ago and 8 years ago and 15 years ago. So there's also memory pain. That's my responsibility. And almost always, there's also dad in sixth grade. Just to be reality, that's the real world. But so just being aware of that, and the more the couple can be aware of that reality, the better off they'll be. Just naming that very briefly. Now, second piece. So what about you caused the same pain 15 years ago? First of all, acknowledging that, if you're the more you're so the ideal is here's the husband. I forgot your anniversary. I forgot our anniversary today. No flowers. And I remember that time. It was a big event. Our 10th anniversary. It was a big deal, and I totally spaced out, and I was at the barber's getting my hair cut when you called me and asked, "Are you coming for dinner for our special restaurant reservation?" I mean, like, oh my gosh, big boo boo. Um, if you can, if you're as the husband, you're not triggered, your relational circuits are on, and you're able to say, "Oh my gosh, sweetheart, I did it again. I I forgot our anniversary today, and I know this is something that really I'm thinking about when that happened in our 10th anniversary, and my perception is that there's still pain there we haven't resolved fully. I am so sorry for that, and I do want to keep working on that pain to permanently resolve it, and I'm sorry for today." Now, if you, out of the box as the husband, own and apologize for the present and 10th anniversary, that will help a lot. I mean, you will dramatically reduce the damage. But just you're correct, Dan, that just acknowledging that and apologizing and attuning today, including acknowledging, and that's a good word.
I like that word.
We'll have to coin that term, acknowledging and apologizing in one word. If you acknowledge your 10th anniversary boo boo, attune and apologize for that as well. Hitting both of those will help. But just acknowledging and apologizing for the old pain will not permanently heal it. The good news is there is another tool that can do that. So right here today, oh my goodness, I screwed up again, and I'm sorry about the 10th anniversary. I can't imagine that's not also getting triggered. I'm so sorry. And then you also want to make plans as a couple, and let's do what it takes to permanently heal that old memory so that we don't pay for that as well every time I trip over this same problem in the present. Did that did that adequately address your question there, Dan?
Yes, it does take both, right? You do have to acknowledge the moment and be intentional about acknowledging a past activity and make that it's what's the main topic. This is the main topic right now. We're going to acknowledge right now on our way to our now late anniversary because I forgot. And at some point, maybe not at dinner today, acknowledge the prior versions and why those were so painful.
Well, not just I mean, you can even take a minute to say yes, and I own that. I wanted to name that. I acknowledge that, and I really apologize for that as well. And at some point, we want to actually do the work to permanently heal that old wound, so that it's because when you do that with the Immanuel approach, you can go back to that memory. You can finish the old processing tasks that weren't done the first time, and you can metabolize that 10th anniversary. Uh, you can permanently resolve that so that it's gone. So you want to acknowledge it now, acknowledge it, apologize it for now, and you want to permanently heal it some other time.
All right. So we're going to get to the permanent healing, but let's switch to last time we specifically talked about an autistic or neurodivergent man and a non autistic woman. So we're going to switch today to we acknowledge that there are different neurotypes in men and women, but to keep it simpler, an autistic man, a non autistic wife. And for the listeners, I want to kind of also draw your attention to some other podcasts we've done about the brain of the autistic individual. So I'm going to give you a quick little rundown. We know that in the autistic brain, the amygdala is larger. And so that is our fight, flight, or freeze. So there's going to be reaction or dysregulation that comes easier in fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. We also know that the cingulate gyrus can be easily overwhelmed. So even emotion above my voice right now can come up.
The singular gyrus.
Well, it's the part of the brain that does part of your emotional regulation, I guess, but
Really, yes. So I talk about
right.
relational,
I know, I'm just giving, like, a rundown. They can
but
Google on their
but this
own.
this will because to me the key is that part of the brain she just mentioned is in the middle of what I talk about as relational circuits, which is going to be two-thirds of my answer. So yes, it will. Uh, yeah, just you can merge there the cingulate gyrus and the relational circuits that I'm going to talk about, and it's helpful just to it'll make more sense in 5 minutes.
Yes, okay. So let me finish my whole little monologue here. We also know in the autistic brain, the corpus callosum, which is a band of tissue that connects the right and left hemisphere of the brain. We know that it's smaller in the autistic brain. We know it's thinner, which means sometimes communication is not going as smoothly between the right and left hemisphere as we would like. It's been described by one researcher as if in the neurotypical brain, that part works like a well orchestrated orchestra. In the autistic brain, it can sometimes work like an improv jam session where you're not quite sure what you're going to get in translation from right to left brain. And the big piece tying in the relational circuits, I did a deep dive in this and found about six academic articles that talked about the orbital prefrontal cortex, which is the OFC mentioned in all of Dr. Wilder's work. It's kind of home, it does many things, but it is also home to the relational circuits and identity and regulation. And according to Dr. Wilder, the person on the spectrum essentially wakes up with those circuits off. It's like the brain is working for efficiency. And so, what he calls simple enemy mode, which is an incendiary term to some, but essentially means waking up without my relation circuits on, and I'm not even aware my relation circuits are off. Therefore, I must be intentional to turn my relation circuits on. So, those are factors that we're dealing with in addition to the VLE. So let me kind of throw you some specific examples and let you talk us through it. So there could be, from the autistic person's point of view, um, perceiving something like, honey, you forgot the milk, or hey, I'm really hurt that you forgot our anniversary, can cause a big reaction of fight or flight over a simple thing. Or it might also be maybe they had parents who were very critical and very performative about their grades or behavior, especially in our men that aren't even diagnosed till they're 30, 40, 50 years old. So they went through their childhood, their parents went through their childhood, they went through school. So there's a lot of processing on sometimes why am I different or why I didn't fit in. And there's, exclamations they've explanations they filled in there. So, what could be happening? Let's start with a really simple one. The wife comes to the autistic person and is making some sort of either, hey, you didn't follow through on the thing. I'm confused, or I'm hurt about this anniversary, or hey, we didn't get the lawn done on Saturday and we had an agreement about that. How could that be experienced as trauma to the autistic person, kind of walking us through that same approach?
Yeah, and you named two separate pieces, and I want to address them each of them. So one is that their brain will be more vulnerable to going out of relational mode because of the things you described. The well, just their relational circuits, like Dr. Wilder talked about, waking up in not in simple enemy mode, which I would call just non-relational mode. It just means your relational circuits are off, and when they're off, this is another one of those things I would have proposed. You had a light there as well. It would say, not there'd be a green and red light. One's like you could see a blinking red light, non-relational mode, non-relational mode. You'd wake up and you'd be like, oh, the red blinking non-relational mode light is on. Um, Golly, this day is going to go a whole lot better if the first thing I do is take care of that. Take a 10-minute break right now and get my relational circuits back on so I get the green light. Unfortunately, you don't have that circuit. And when you're in non-relational mode, it just feels normal. It just feels like, hey, I'm just trying to get things done. And because of time today, I'm going to refer. The good news is in Outsmarting Yourself, one of my books, I talk a lot about this. This is so important for every relationship in the world, and especially for marriages. That I have a whole chapter about like what are the relational circuits, why they're so important, and then I describe in a lot of detail what does it look like when you're in relational mode or in non-relational mode. And I talk about there's a whole chapter about how do you spot when you're in non-relational mode. How do you spot? How can you learn the skill of noticing quickly that red light is blinking and you're in non-relational mode? We didn't get that just in our brains wired. Again, I'll ask Jesus about that when I get to heaven. But this is a skill you can learn. And it is so important to my assessment that like I said, I wrote an entire chapter about how can you learn the skill of building that red blinking light in your own brain so that you can more and more quickly notice, oh, I'm in non-relational mode, simple enemy mode in Jim's language, and every aspect of relationship will be bumpier and not work out, not turn out as well. If you're in non-relational mode, if you're in simple enemy mode, all kinds of simple stuff will just be more difficult to navigate. You'll be more easier to trigger. You won't be able to see your spouse's true heart. Learning the skill of recognizing that that light is on, your non-relational mode is hugely valuable. I mean that if you take that one thing away from this podcast, get that book and study that chapter and learn that skill. And it'll take a while to learn, but that is one of the most valuable things you can do. It will change every relationship, and especially the ones that are biggest. More good news. After the chapter on how do you recognize that you slipped into or you woke up in simple enemy mode, non-relational mode, that chapter, how do you recognize it? The next four chapters are, so how do you get those circuits back on? That's so important that recognizing, oh, simple enemy mode, I woke up in it, or a simple interaction slid me there. And even if Dan named about, things you can do right now, and then some other time we'll get permanent healing. So often there's not space to get permanent healing right now for if you got triggered. But there are a number of things that you can do, you can learn to do right now. In 10 to 15 minutes, you can take a break, and there's like a chapter for each one of four interventions, just receiving attunement, appreciation, calming, and non-sarcastic humor. There's a whole toolbox there you can learn to get those circuits back on or get yourself out of simple enemy mode if you woke up in it. Those two pieces, learning to spot it and then being able to get out of enemy mode back into relational mode, that package right there, Charlotte and I apply that like every day of our lives. Well, 363 days out of 365, that comes up somewhere. And learning those pieces has been a huge blessing to our marriage. So the idea that just the autistic neurology is going to make them more vulnerable to wake up in simple enemy or non-relational mode, and more easy to slide in there because one way you get into simple enemy non-relational mode is just having your skills and capacities overwhelmed just in the present. The stress in my wife's voice, and if we're going to be really painfully honest, if we played the video and I watched it with you, so many of those interactions, there's going to be a little bit of irritation, a little bit of triggering. Um, it doesn't take much if your brain is vulnerable to get a little triggered. There'll be old memories. I'll talk about it in a minute, but just in the present, any stress, any negative emotion stress will push you towards non-relational simple enemy mode. And so one part of the neurology you talked about is, yes, for the autistic spectrum person, that system will be more vulnerable. And if there's any old pain stirred up, those two pieces, negative emotion stress right now, and any old pain from the past, those two pieces are the team that will push your circuits off, your relational circuits off, pushing you into simple enemy mode, and you'll be more vulnerable to that on the autistic spectrum. Right. And then as I just finish the summary there, yeah. So like learning to recognize that, learning to get your circuits back on, that's like I can do that right now, dramatically limit the damage. And then we'll talk, you want to talk later about, and then getting permanent healing, long-term plan, you can just have fewer and fewer landmines in your yard just to stumble over, which in the long term, that's a really big payoff. If each year goes by, there's fewer landmines that just live around your house and in your yard, your whole life is going to get steadily better over time.
Okay.
So,
So let's
Phil,
use that example you gave about the anniversary thing. The wife calls the spouse and says, "Hey, what about our anniversary?" And let's just say she's doing it in the calmest, just a little bit of hurt and curious. but he is triggered and has hit trauma pain. Well, you kind of start from there as to what might be going on for him and his trauma and his past pain, bringing in everything you just mentioned.
Yes. So something to name there. Um, the Just like in the present adult, the autistic spectrum brain will be more vulnerable to kind of sliding out of relational mode into simple enemy mode. So a part of trauma is that is that same issue. Uh, Possibly the biggest contributor to what it turns out to be traumatic, like in your childhood, is if your relational circuits get pushed off so that you feel alone in the situation. You're not able to feel your community or your family with you kind of emotionally. And uh, the short summary there is the autistic spectrum child will be more vulnerable to any negative experience not being adequately processed and therefore becoming traumatic. So, autistic spectrum child, it'll take less of a smaller problem, issue, pain, um, will cause a trauma. They will be so. Just again from last time, the 30-second summary. If a painful experience happens and you're able to stay connected emotionally and relationally and successfully process it, it will be metabolized and just make you stronger and not be a trauma. And trauma comes from a painful experience that you're not able to stay relational and metabolize it. And the autistic spectrum person will be more vulnerable to painful experiences being traumatic. And that translates into what's the chance that an autistic spectrum adult is going to be what's the chance that they're going to have a lot of old trauma to bump into? About 100%. Well, especially when they're more vulnerable. Well, so many things to say. So nobody gets out of childhood without some traumas. That's one of my beliefs, especially if you have the understanding about trauma that it's just painful things you don't fully metabolize. So there's small t trauma. 100% of us have some of that. Autistic spectrum people will have more because their brains are more vulnerable, as I just explained. And frequently, autistic spectrum people have other people in their family tree who are also on the spectrum. And if one of your parents, I have actually worked with somebody, a number of somebodies, but one particular person I've done a lot of coaching with who had an autistic spectrum parent and lots of no maliciousness, but subtle small t trauma, lots. For example, if your mom is on the spectrum and frequently does not her face does not, even if she's read the manuals about how you should respond to your baby, but the circuits in her brain that kind of do that normally and just smoothly are impaired. So that child's going to have lots of subtle trauma about, wow, um, there were lots of times when I encountered some pain as a child, skinned my knee, my bunny died, my friends didn't invite me to their birthday party. And if you have a parent who can attune quickly, who can be present and provide adequate support and attunement, and the child feels, oh, I skinned my knee, my bunny died, and my mom saw it and she got it and she was with me there, and I could feel from her face and her voice tone that she was with me. Many, many, many of those little bumps are not traumatic because you get to process them. There's somebody with you. That whole thing. That's how it's designed to work. If your parent is on the spectrum, they will be less able to do that. So not only is your own brain more vulnerable to start with, but one of your key support system people will be less able to supply the support and attunement that if an adult is with you as a child and they can help you process the painful event, that dramatically reduces the number that turn into small t trauma. If you have an autistic spectrum primary care provider, that's another big liability that's going to increase the chance that you've got a bunch of little t trauma laying around. Does that all?
Yes, I want to add one more layer. So we know that especially children and teenagers, their emotional, social, relational coming online is about 30% behind their biological age. So let's say something happens, and let's say an undiagnosed 12-year-old autistic person, and they have high intellect and vocabulary of a 15, 16, 17-year-old person, but the way they relate in the world and their emotional social relationship understanding is more at the age of an 8 or 9-year-old. What added complexity does that add to the verbal logic explainer?
Well, um, with limited time, you mean a big part of that picture is that's another handicap that they're going to have as far as navigating the average difficult, painful things that happen in grade school and junior high and high school. That's another handicap it's going to make it easier to have painful events turn into small t traumas. And you put all that together. So here's that, in your example, the autistic spectrum husband who forgets the anniversary or forgets the anniversary, and they have a little a small, nobody's yelling, nobody's throwing things, but just a little bit of pain and irritation there. Um, their circuits just in the present will be pushed off more easily because they're more vulnerable, and the chance that they also have small t trauma triggered is close to 100. So that's um, that's just sobering news. I mean, that the reality is that's a challenge. That's an extra challenge that a couple with with a autistic spectrum spouse is. Um, that's an extra challenge they're going to face. That brain will get pushed into simple enemy mode more easily in the present, and the chance that small t trauma is going to get triggered much more easily, and there's going to be a lot of it there. Both those pieces are just going to be a part of your average day. And the good news again is you can learn to spot you went into non-relational mode. There are tools to get your circuits back on right now. And we have tools to just shovel away at those small t traumas. So all those things that are challenging and sobering and discouraging, they're all things that we can do something about.
So I don't know how much we've got a limited amount of time. So I've got a question. I know we still want to get
Yeah, we
to
want to get to
Emmanuel.
healing. So
So just really quickly, let's talk about the complexity and how much it's really known by the individuals. Let's go back to that situation. You've got a chronologically 15-year-old that has high IQ, but also might be from an emotionally capable perspective, maybe, I don't know, 5 years younger than that. So they're well developed mentally. They're at a spot chronologically that's in the middle of those, and their emotional processing is well below their chronology. That is a complex thing to navigate. How conscious is a person of such a situation when we're talking about going through that trauma processing a situation? I didn't get invited to the thing, or a 15-year-old, the girl doesn't like me, I asked her out and she said no. That level of processing through that emotion, how conscious is that person of the gap between all of those capabilities such that they can navigate all of that well?
When they're 15 or when they're an adult remembering it?
Well, maybe both, but especially in the moment and when you're
Yeah, when
15.
you're 15. So this is, I'll take 30 seconds on this one. Uh, this seems to be pretty widespread that your experience just feels normal. Like a classic story is that a person in an alcoholic family frequently does not discover that until they get to college, and they're in the dorm and they hear their friends talking. And it's like nobody else talks about. Dad comes home and the first thing you do is evaluate how drunk is he. If he's not drunk at all, normal. If he's a little drunk, he's happy, ask for money. If he's medium drunk, he's dangerous, hide. And if he's really really drunk, just drag him to the bedroom. I mean, he can't hurt you. I mean, like they were like, oh my gosh. And as strange as that sounds, frequently they don't discover they just thought, well, that's normal. That's what happened. I mean, it doesn't occur to you in grade school. Our other families totally different than mine. You just think what happens in my house is normal. In the same way, what happens in my brain that you think, oh, this is just the way it is. So mostly that 15-year-old will have no awareness that their internal experience is dramatically unusual. And what about that? Huge asset is if there's somebody in their life who knows that, and really optimal is that kid can do a manual approach. And as they're doing that as they're navigating that extra challenging obstacle course, someone can help them actually be aware of it, that they have a handicap. They're having to they got leg weights on for this obstacle course, and all the other kids don't. And they can talk to Jesus about it as they're going through it. So that's like the 1.5 minute. Then back to uh, with our limited time, back to the question of healing trauma, and maybe we'll do a third installment because there's so many cool. I mean, the cool thing is there's so much good news in this whole package about ways in which the Lord can make a big positive difference in this whole challenging picture.